Welcome to Medical Matters Weekly with Dr. Trey Dobson, presented by Southwestern Vermont Healthcare and Catamount Access Television.
Today is July 6, 2022. I'm Trey Dobson, Chief Medical Officer at Southwestern Vermont Medical Center and an emergency medicine physician with Dartmouth Health. And this is Medical Matters Weekly, a show about the aspects of healthcare that matter to you most. My guest today is Sean McNiff. He is an artist, art therapist, author, professor, advocate for the healing power of art, and many other things. Sean, thank you so much for joining us.
You're great to be here, Trey. Thank you.
Where are you right now? I see a bookshelf behind you and a beautiful painting.
Well, I'm in Gloucester, Massachusetts, in a little village called Annisquam on Ipswich Bay.
Oh, great. Sean is author of many books. One is Imagination in Action, Secrets for Unleashing Creative Expression. He established the first integrated arts therapy and education graduate training program, is a painter, and presented with Lifetime Achievement Award of the Journal of Applied Arts and Health, and the Honorary Life Member Award of the American Art Therapy Association, and many other things. So we can post those on our website and you can look at his bio. Is that your painting behind you over your left shoulder?
Yes, that is one of many. Yes.
It's great. Well, tell us just a little bit about your background and where you're from and how you got into this.
Well, thank you for the very generous introduction, Trey. And what I want to underscore is what you said about my life work being advocacy for the universal, transcultural, timeless healing power of artistic expression. I mean, thank you for saying that. And that's what it's always been about for me. Starting as a young person, realizing what art could do to me in terms of helping me. As Nietzsche once said, when all else fails, art emerges as a healing sorceress, expert at doing things that just aren't possible through the linear logical mind, as wonderful as it is. And that's what I've always done.
So you started off when you were younger. Did you become an artist quickly, or what led you in the path of artists, being an artist?
I'm one of many artists who so many of the artists that I admire. I mean, Picasso, of course, is one of a great persons who doesn't fit into this mold. But those people that went to law school, did other kinds of things, and then just continuously, work their way into a vocation, a calling, as we say. The soul's code, as my friend James Hillman used to say, the calling of art. And very serendipitously, after dropping out of law school, breaking my father's heart when I was working in the family law firm, I very serendipitously found myself in this work doing art as therapy. And one of the best things I think that I've said as I work with people around the world in terms of how I was able to do what I do and the way I do it is that I was not trained in what I call the psychodynamics, psychological stereotypes that are just so contrary to the healing processes of art. Art is not something that we want to be analyzing in this linear reductive way and imposing these often silly psychological diagnostic narratives on it. And that's been my life work, is to generate a more imaginative way of not only making the art but engaging it.
So when I think about Sean, for example, my colleagues, myself in medicine as physicians, it's a little bit of a misnomer that we went into the field to be curative, because we know so many things are not really subject to full cures, but we did go into the field to limit suffering and improve the lives of others. And it seems like that's the aim of art therapy as well. How does art accomplish some of those properties to limit suffering and improve well-being?
Well, that's Trey. That's what it's always done throughout time in terms of engaging suffering. engaging pain, and using it as fuel, as the energy of artistic expression, doing something life-affirming and positive with our deepest afflictions. That's what art has done throughout history. The tragedy is one of the great examples of it. It's interesting what you said about healing and curing, because I was very involved with the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute for many years, which is a whole other story. But Dr. Nathan, the very distinguished director at Dana-Farber at the time, I think it was around 2000, said to me, "You know what, Sean, we physicians are always, our work is about curing, but we can't always cure. And I can tell you," he said, "based on what I see here at Dana-Farber, is that art heals." And I wrote a book in 2004 with that title and credited to him. How art heals is it's an energizing force, and it always has been, in terms of this creative energy that can renew our lives. And as I say, take those afflictions and do something positive with them. That's what healing is, taking the difficulty and transforming it. And art does that in the most empirical way. Totally empirical. I have a lot of trouble with today's social science research, which is another one of the strange psychological dynamics going on in the world today. But art is a very palpable, tangible, a healing power, and it works with absolute consistency now and throughout history. When in indigenous societies where illness was defined as soul loss, and the indigenous healer would engage the community, the whole community, in an enactment, in artistic creative processes that work to restore soul in the community and in the person. And we need that more than ever today.
You know, that makes me think, Sean, as I try to figure out a little bit about how, which is not really as important. It's the what that comes out of it, as you were implying. But I think of when people get very ill, you know, they lose one of the driving mechanisms to life, which is purpose. You know, you need purpose, you need people, you need passion in your life. And if you lose that purpose, sometimes that really inhibits the healing process. And I can see how art would bring purpose back to people's lives. Have you seen that?
Oh, absolutely. And the once again, the healing force in relation to art is creative energy. And so what we have to do, what my work is all about, is trying to persuade people usually, and to convince them that they can do it. If we say if art healing is so consistently and empirically effective throughout history, why is it that we don't do it? Right. Why is it not a fundamental force in public health, universally accessible to people everywhere? And it's because of all the resistances that we have, all the fears that we have about exposing our vulnerability, all the sort of ingrained social stereotypes about talent and who can make art and who can't make art. I keep telling people who are afraid is that just start with painting, for example, or dance and movement. Just move, start to move. And then, as John Cage said to me once, keep moving. Don't stop, repeat, sustain it. People start beautifully making these beautiful gestures, but then they start thinking too much. Thinking's a wonderful tool, but we need to put it in our back pocket and let it follow rather than always taking the lead. So what I'm always trying to say to people is that artistic expression is essential and as natural as breathing. It's so that accessible. It is a force of nature. It's a force of nature. Everyone can do it. It's all these attitudes, these head trips that we do to ourselves to limit involvement and the notions of quality. I find that the best work is the most spontaneous, natural, unplanned work.
And that's the most inspiring, which leads back to that purpose. So Sean, take us through, through your day and through an encounter. How do you get connected with a patient?
Well, first of all, I don't, first of all, number one, I feel that art healing is always a complement to what the fundamentally necessary and important work that you do. It is in no way, as we say, complementary, as
Right.
you said so well. It is, it's part of the gestalt. It's part of the ecosystem of the life force that you talked about the commitment to living. It certainly doesn't in no way claim to replace traditional medical practice. So I do not view myself as a medical person. I view myself as an art person, and I'm trying to mobilize the arts and therapy field worldwide, where I have the opportunity to work with people globally, to keep the art base. Don't overly clinify the work. So what I do is I'm always working in a studio. I'm always working in groups. I prefer to work in community. I've never, ever worked with, quote, individual patients. I started my work in setting up an art studio in one of the big New England state hospitals here, where the patients in that studio taught me how art heals. And when people say, has your work changed in terms of what's happened over the years? And I say, not really. I'm still going back to those foundations, those first experiences with native indigenous people here in Essex County, Massachusetts, indigenous to this place, not talking about Native American people, and their artistic expression, which just taught me everything I do. And working in community, affirming each other. Communities can do a lot of damage, as we know today. Groups can do a lot of damage. So what I've always done in my work is work in what I call the therapeutic community of art. Maxwell Jones, the great British psychiatrist, the founder of the therapeutic community movement, was close to me. And I've always looked at my work as creating therapeutic communities of artistic expression. And that's what I do. So Trey, I started at 26. I founded a graduate program when I was 26, 27 years old. So I've always been involved in leading communities. And so I've never done a traditional clinical practice. But I've had the opportunity through that platform to engage people throughout the world in community. And there are just so many thousands of arts therapists now throughout the world that go out and work in every conceivable situation.
Sure. So are these individuals, they typically referred to you? Do they hear about you, or how do they find out about art? First off, how do they even find out about the concept of art as being a collaborative portion, or you said a complementary portion to their treatment?
Well, in my work, I've written a lot of books. Art is Medicine, Art Heals, and the books have had great lives. They've been translated into many languages. As you mentioned some of them. I wrote a book, The Arts in Psychotherapy, in 1991, the first one. And so people come, they know my work, they come, and I've been fortunate.
What would you say?
I just got through, we were talking about this medium of the Zoom era. As frustrating as it is for me not to be traveling like I used to. I just did a session with the Hong Kong community. I did another one just before that with Australia. So these are principles that are not unique to me that I'm talking. Art healing is when I started in 1970 as a law school dropout at Danvers State Hospital, serendipitously finding myself in art and therapy, I was one of the only people in New England doing it. There was Helga Handel at McLean Hospital in Belmont, who became a close colleague. And I think there are a couple of people at Worcester State Hospital, but there wasn't much happening in terms of institutional practice. Now the work is ubiquitous. That's good, but there are shadows. There are shadows to over-clinification, losing the art community base, which complements medicine, complements.
Yes, and I can see exactly where you're going with that. I can understand that. So tell me, how would you advise someone in the audience here? We have a pretty good audience, size-wise, incorporating a lot of New England. If they are maybe going through some trauma themselves or some medical situations, how should they go about looking towards art as a healing complement?
Well, in my book, Art Heals, I'm very clear, is the fundamental premise in that book, or I try to be clear. I don't want to gratuitously compliment myself.
Yeah.
I try to be clear that art heals everywhere. Art heals everywhere. It heals in therapy and it heals outside of therapy.
Mm.
It is not, I tell my arts and therapy colleagues, we need to be, you need to be much more community activists, advocates for art healing in the most comprehensive ways, in addition to your clinical practices. You need to supervise, you need to encourage community programs, which they're everywhere now. They're in Vermont, they're everywhere. And I think that people interested, I mean, if they want to get into a literal art therapy, a relationship of the various states have their professional associations, and there's a New England Art Therapy Association. But I really encourage people to engage in community. I dream of an AA, of artistic community. I dream of self-help. Oh, Billy Wilson, he nailed it. Because we're not dealing with literal medical practice. We're dealing with a psycho-spiritual, soulful, regenerative, transformative process. As Socrates said to Charmides, the problem is you're dealing with the body before the soul. You've got to deal with the whole thing. You've got to deal with the whole complex.
Sure. What are some of the barriers you've seen through your life's work here in getting folks to go through the healing process with art? Well,
the fundamental barriers, I don't want to repeat too much what I just said, is the reluctance to participate, resistance, that I can't do this, I'm not an artist. The art is for artists, and so I find in my work when engaging people everywhere, from the professional artists that come to my studios, they need to often get out of their habitual things. And then there are the people who don't see themselves as artists. So what I'm trying to do with people everywhere is to encourage what I call the movement basis of expression. If you can simply start breathing, my doctoral students have done wonderful dissertations about this. If you could just simply start moving, as John Cage said, and then keep moving, it will come. It will appear. It will come with quality and naturalness if you can move in your own unique way. And that's a significant challenge, Trey, because people resist. One of my graduate students said, you know, Sean, but resistance is the gateway. And I agree, because all that built up energy of the resistance can explode into affirmative expressions, and people constantly say, I can't believe I did that.
So we're talking about
they say, I needed this safe.
Right.
That drives me crazy, the way the word safe space has been appropriated, because we're not talking about that, because we want conflict. We want the energy of our difficulties and everything else, but we need a place that's safe, that allows us to engage it without judgment. That's what people need everywhere. And many of my graduate students have done their theses on what they call the finger-pointing judge. The worst judgments often come from within ourselves, that we've internalized. So that's the main obstacle everywhere, not skill, not talent. Because if I go look at the film, it's the folks that are listening, that the London Art Therapy Center did when I was with them a few years ago. It's a Google London Art Therapy Center. It's I think it's 7 or 9 minutes long. And it just shows 120 people making this incredible art by just taking black markers or Conte crayons and moving with it. But the key is they have to keep moving.
Right. Oh my gosh, it's fantastic. So you're talking about barriers and resistance among the individuals themselves. I'm sure sometimes it comes from outside of them, maybe within their groups, whether it's their care providers or their family. or friends. And I'm sure you've seen that, and you can get around that just by working with the individual.
I find that people with a great degree of universality want to support one another. And I find whenever I'm in a community, and I'm in these communities all the time, the people come with the desire to support and affirm. It's the individual person's own innate resistance, fear of exposing yourself, fear. Once again, I have to talk about the art diagnostic movement because it's a bad history. It's a history where, as I say, whatever you paint can and will be used against you. Black, I mean, these ludicrous, simple-minded reductions. Black is depression, brown has something to do with other things, red is anger. I mean, it's madness, and it's still alive and well. Psychology, as much as I've dedicated my life to it, there's that element of psychology that's hardwired to reduce and explain. And in this day of power and privilege that everyone's repeating all the time, how about the authoritarian ways in which these images are interpreted by people in mental health? So that's another resistance. Fear of showing yourself, fear of not being good enough. I mean, these things run deep. One of the things I talk about is that the principles of art healing, as I've discovered from my research and my experience worldwide in my studies of history, because I studied history first as the first discipline. The way in which art heals that I've described is universal, now and throughout history. There's a commonality. Hans Prinzhorn, the wonderful German psychiatrist that wrote The Artistry of the Mentally Ill in 1922, talked about the universal urge for human expression. These are universal drives. We know through human prehistory, history, and so on and so forth. These things are ingrained in the human community. I've discovered in my experiences that resistances to expressions are similarly universal and ingrained. The fear of expression, universally ingrained. That's the challenge.
Right. Tell us.
So how do you deal with it? Play, relaxation, accessibility, universal access. I'm working with a group in Vienna, working with art and dementia care, and there's a lot of play. There's a lot of engagement. I mean, relaxing people into just what, as John Lennon says, it's what happens while you're making plans.
Right. Exactly. So tell us a good story, Sean. Tell us about a patient or two that you've worked with and the outcome.
Oh, well, there are just so many. I mean, the formative story is one that the first people that I worked with in terms of people that living in that really, my Irish Catholic grandmother talking about stories who actually worked as a volunteer. Maybe that's the best story. In the state hospital where I first worked for 20 years since I was an infant, and used to have a big garden party every summer in a garden with busloads of patients coming from the state hospital. So that was my first exposure to the state hospital. And believe me, I wouldn't have gotten that job unless if it wasn't for my grandmother. The director of personnel who hired me as a law school dropout said, well, if you're Margaret Tyndall's grandson, there must be something good about you. So she was that first exposure. And what happened in those early days of the state hospital, you have these people that hadn't spoken for years, starting to, through encouragement, through my constant encouragement. Sometimes I talk about the overuse of the word intervention. But I remember one fellow, Anthony, kept making the same stick figure over and over and over again. He hadn't talked. He's 36 years old since he was 15 years old, and was admitted to the hospital. And I did hold his hand, and I said, Anthony, you have to stop doing this. And then, of course, his art has been exhibited widely throughout New England, and in the graduate program at Lesley University that I founded came out of those original artists who did this wondrous work that the Massachusetts Council of Arts and Humanities supported, And when it was at Harvard, the dean of the graduate school at Lesley saw it and said, boy, we have to do this at Lesley.
That's great. So what advice would you give to the doctors and nurses that listen to this show who may not be familiar with art as healing?
Well, make it accessible. Find your ways. Look, you've got to look at the literature. I can't do it too simplistically here.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I've pushed within the Art Therapy Guild, there's a reluctance to let special education teachers in, volunteers, nurses, other, quote, non-certified. I mean, as much as professional disciplines advance a profession, they also limit access.
Yes.
I'm profoundly against the limitations that my brothers and sisters and all of the others in the arts and therapy community do to limit access. So I've always found that nurses are that first in the medical community, nurses, volunteers, other caretakers.
Mm-hmm.
The broadest possible participation, and just forget about yourself. Have your confidence in what the art can do. And watch out for the coloring books and all that other stuff. And just get people moving and expressing themselves naturally.
Sean, thank you so much for joining us on the show. This is I will say, without too much of a pun here, your enthusiasm is infectious and we appreciate it. And I can see how that leads to purpose and hope for others who are going through the healing process. So thank you.
Thank you, Trey. Art heals.
Art heals. I'll also thank Mike Cutler from CAT TV, Ray Smith from Southwestern Vermont Healthcare, Ashley Jallett from Southwestern Vermont Healthcare. I'm Trey Dobson. Go out and find joy in everything you do, even in the face of adversity, and we will see you next week.